Okay, let's start. So, hi Bill.
Hi Marie, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Very well.
Thank you so much for being here today. So I have a couple of questions for you. So first of all, I'm gonna make you repeat. When did you came to France first? When did you come to France first?
I spent 2 years in France when I was 16 to 17. So that was 1969 to 70. I'm very old. and then again when I was 20 to 21, and from 1973 to 74. It was a very different time in France. And I think, honestly, I probably could not have chosen a better time to come to France than, I had no choice. It was based on my age,
Yeah.
and my interest, obviously. But it was probably a different France. It was a different America at that time as well. We can go into it later, but I think there were many advantages for me coming to France at that time. I even saw a difference between 69 and 70 and 73 and 74
Wow. Okay.
in some ways.
Okay, wow. How was France during the 70s then?
Okay. Well, France was, maybe I'll go back a little bit. Basically, I wanted to go to France. I think you're going to ask me this later, but I was going France in the 60s. I think the key thing is you have to remember, it was only probably less than 25 years after the end of World War II.
Okay.
So, which is kind of crazy to think about.
Yeah.
But the generation of people that were there were often like the parents of people I knew were involved in World War II, as was my dad, for example. And so it was a very different mindset. I chose to spend a year of high school basically in France through it's called the AFS, the American Field Service. It started out in a couple of weeks in Paris, going through a sort of an intensive language course. And then I had several choices to go to. I could have stayed in Paris. I could have gone different places, but I chose to go to Bayonne. I didn't want to be in Paris. I wanted to see, I guess they would say la France profonde, the real true France. And I did. I think I got a very, very unique experience. In those days, it was somewhat of a novelty to be an American in France. There were not a lot, especially in Bayonne. It is a popular resort area for the British, Biarritz, Bayonne, but not so much for Americans. And even Americans coming to France in the late 60s, 70s was somewhat unusual.
Yeah.
It was very exotic, from an American standpoint. Oh, we're going to France.
Yeah.
And you have to remember, there was no internet, there was no email, there were no telephone answering machines, there was no cell phones, there was nothing. It was mail.
Yeah.
And you know all about the mail system.
Yeah.
So you really were on your own. And so being an American there, it was different. I certainly felt different in my couple of weeks of Paris than I felt when I went to Bayonne. It was a much more friendly atmosphere in Bayonne. As I said, I was somewhat of a novelty there, and which made it easy to make friends because they were very interested in me.
Yeah.
And I don't tend to be a very shy person. In fact, what was odd, I think I was probably less shy than I would be in the United States. That was my attitude because I figured I had nothing to lose. If people thought I was stupid, they thought I was stupid, and that's the way it goes.
Yeah.
And I was placed in a host family, famille d'accueil, and had a son who was my age, Didier. And so it worked out very well because I met his friends and his girlfriend and her girlfriends. And so it was sort of like a built-in family fairly easily. And like I said, it was a small area, small town. Bayonne is not small, but compared to Paris, it's small.
Yeah.
And it's pretty far from Paris, and it's a different culture. And the people were exceedingly friendly. It was a wonderful experience.
Amazing.
And if it was not a wonderful experience, I wouldn't have done it again. So
Yeah, for sure. Oh, I'm so glad actually to hear that. The next question will have been like, was it difficult to live to adapt yourself? I guess no, in the end. Or maybe, what was difficult?
Well, it was difficult it was a difficult decision, I guess, to go because, I mean, I'm an only child. It was just me. And my father was from northwestern Vermont. I know some of yours, and just a few miles from Quebec. And in fact, his father was born in Quebec, but didn't speak a single word of French. It was like kind of the part of Quebec near Ontario. So, and my father spoke no French. But when he was 17 in high school, that's when Pearl Harbor began. And his class was, I think, 40 kids, and half of them were boys, and all of them left high school to join the armed forces in Pearl Harbor. And so he did that as well. So he was 17, he joined the Navy and stayed in there for 25 years. And so I was raised in the Navy, sort of. And he never really lived there again. So he left home at 17. So maybe it was genetically, I said, when I was about 15, I was thinking, well, you know, let me do something interesting. And it was a big decision because, like I said, there was not a lot of support. My mother was not very happy when we decided to do this. As I said, you know, it really, even to make a phone call to the United States was very expensive. And you had to, there were no cell phones and no answering machines. So you had to sort of plan ahead. You had to send a letter saying, I'm going to call you 4 weeks from now on Sunday, and make sure you're home. So you answer the phone. And it's strange. It's hard for us to think of that today. But so I probably spoke to my parents, I don't know, maybe 4 times each year that I was there. So, and that's about it. There was no email, no anything. I did send letters. I did write letters. Some of them got there, some of them didn't.
Tell me about it.
They did get there, but yeah, it was a big decision to make, and there were a few moments when I said, "Oh, this was not the smartest thing, Bill." But overall, it was a wonderful experience. I would, looking back at it at almost 70 years old now, it was something I would never change. It would never have changed. It really had a lot of positive effects on my life. So.
Wow, it's wonderful. Wow, this is so cool. Okay, so at any point during your adventure on, you know, both adventures here, did you experience racism?
Well, being a white male, I didn't experience what I would call racism because the vast majority of people I met were Caucasian, were white. So at that time, put it this way, at that time in France, in Bayonne, there were very, very few, I guess I would call them in the United States, minorities. There were basically, I can think of a couple of Algerian students in the lycée and maybe one African student. But really, in the day-to-day going about town, it was really rare to run into anyone that was not white. European, basically. And like I said, there were very few Americans there as well. There were a fair amount of British tourists that would come to Biarritz, depending on what time of the year it was. But there really was not. In Paris, there were a lot. My whole experience started out, as I said, I lived in Paris for about 3 weeks, and we were in a we were put there to sort of learn, kind of brush up on your French. And my French needed a lot of brushing up on at 16 years old. But they put us in I forgot the name of it, and I forgot the arrondissement, but it was a kind of a housing étranger. So it was everybody like from Africa, from Algeria, from the United States, that was coming to France to sort of do things. And so really what was odd about it was I was with all these people, none of them were French. So, and none of them spoke French very well. So it was kind of stupid, but that's the way it goes. But then we went to class and learned French. I will say the interesting thing to me is that, at least at that time, and I think it's the same thing now, is there's a very, very much larger population of immigrants in Paris than there are in most American cities. There's a large North African, Algerian, Moroccan, and they're mostly in the banlieue, in the outside part of Paris. And they are somewhat isolated. I mean, they sort of have their own communities where they speak Algerian and whatever. So going into those areas, I remember like going to like Saint-Denis at that time, and that was not maybe the safest place to go at 16 by yourself, but it was interesting. It was like I did things that maybe I shouldn't have done, but it was a different kind of an atmosphere at that time. My understanding is that's a very popular place now to live in Paris, supposedly. It's kind of like the Brooklyn of Paris, I've heard. That's part of outside of New York City. But no, I personally did not experience any racism. Like I said, in Bayonne, I was a novelty. I was, everybody said, oh, the American, they said, oh, there's the American, in school. But in Paris, that was not true. In Paris, I was just one of many Americans wandering around. And overall, people were fairly nice to me. I did not interact a lot in Paris. But that was, I guess, I remember doing these classes and kind of saying, oh, okay, my French is getting pretty good. And then going out the first day and saying, talking to someone in French, some saying, I was asking them, could you show me where something is on the map? And I remember talking to like a young guy, 20 something, and all he said to me was, je sais pas. And I said, what? And I said, because I thought he was saying chez, C-H-E-Z, pas. I said, pas. I said, no. And then I went to another guy and sort of said the same thing. And he said the same thing. He said, je sais pas. And okay, so I said, well, I was thinking to myself, I said, bien, tu es dans la merde. And so then finally I saw this younger, 20-year-old girl, and I talked to her and I said, could you show me? And she said, oh, of course. And she showed me on the map where I was and how to get here. And then I asked her, I said, out of curiosity, I said, could I ask you, I said, I met these two. I just asked the same question and all they said to me was, je sais pas. I said, what is je sais pas? And she started laughing and she goes, oh, so je ne sais pas. And I said, it's like bells, ring in my head. So that's something you don't learn in class. You don't learn anywhere. So that was the biggest challenge, was sort of learning the liaisons and the things like that, je suis, je sais pas, all these various things that you don't really understand until you sort of hear them and understand them. But so that was a challenge. So there were a few moments there where I thought, uh-oh. But when I left, my father gave me like 5 rules that he said, you need to do these 5 things if you want to survive the next year. Because he had I lived in a lot of different countries. And I wrote them down somewhere. I'm trying to see where I wrote them down here. So he said, he said his rules to me were, don't ever forget that it's a privilege to be in someone's country or their school or their home. You're there as a guest. You need to behave yourself, basically. Again, this was many years ago, and I'm an old guy, but always treat women like you would want your sister to be treated.
Oh, nice. Wow.
He always said, if someone's eating something, you need to at least try eating it as well. So at least try it one time. And that's never a problem for me. There's not really much that I won't try eating. He said, at your age, you need to work hard, but you need to play harder.
Oh, wow.
And then he basically said, if you're stupid enough to get arrested, don't call me first.
Nice. That's amazing.
We'll
Nice.
call the American embassy. So those are his rules. So, and I sort of lived by them. And he basically said, you know, if you're going to go to France, first of all, I mean, he asked me like, you really want to do this? You're going to be by yourself. Do you really speak French well enough to go there? And I said, probably not, but you know, I'll give it a try. What's the worst that could happen to me? And so, you know, basically he just said, you know, you need, if you're going to go there and really get something out of this, you need to go with the attitude that you're there not only to improve your French. This may sound kind of silly, but to almost become a little bit French. You need to absorb the culture a little bit. And that's very good. The downside to that, though, is looking back at it, is each time you do that, you also leave a little piece of yourself in France that you never get back. Yeah. So with people you meet and people you fall in love with or whatever it is. Yeah. So you always leave a little piece of yourself after something like that. But overall, it was all very, very positive. So.
Wow, that's cool. Wow, we could do a movie on your adventure like this. It's wow.
Well, no, it's not that exciting.
Tell me about your best memory then. One of them, maybe.
One of them. Wow. I guess there were two things. The 2 years were kind of different. The first year when I was in Bayonne, I was fortunate enough, like I said, I was a time in France where it was sort of a novelty to be an American in France. So people were, and the other thing I should say, jump back a second. The other thing my father told me, and I would have probably done it on my own, is he said, you know, if you're going to go someplace, you need to learn about where you're going. You shouldn't just show up. Yeah. Here I am. And so I had, you know, not only did I try to learn the language before I went, but I also tried to learn about Bayonne. And so I kind of knew, you know, there were two rivers, La Deux, La Nive. And so when I went there, like I remember when the family picked me up from the train station, because I took a train from Paris to Bayonne. And, you know, and I called the father, or I guess the mother I spoke to on the phone. And no, actually I apologize. I spoke to the son because he spoke a little bit of English. So I figured between the two of us, we'd be okay. So I told him when the train was coming in. So they picked me up. And, you know, even just driving into the city, I kind of said, oh, that's a beautiful river? Is that the Nive? Or is that like? And so they were surprised I even knew what the rivers were. So we sort of set the stage nicely. It was everything fell into place incredibly wonderfully in Bayonne. As I said, it literally, the boy Didier, who's with me, was friendly guy, nice guy. He had a girlfriend who had a cousin who I met and got very close to. And so basically, and they had their friends. So we basically were a bunch of people for the whole year. So it worked out very, very nicely. So that was all very positive memories. I'm trying to think what I guess one of the most interesting moments I had in Bayonne was my girl, Marie-Hélène was the girl. The funny thing, I want to say petite amie, but it's always such a weird thing to say because I was very tall and she was very short. So she always say petite amie, and it's always anyway. So my copine, her family, her mother was actually much younger than the mother in my host family. She was only 35. So it was like 55 and 35. So I even saw two different generations in the two families. And she had Marie-Hélène when she was very young. The father was not immediately very fond of me, I guess. It was always like, so, I remember we would always be we would be driving in his car and Marie-Hélène and I would be in the back and he'd be looking in the rear view window, looking at me stay away from her. And like that. But anyway, they invited me to a dinner at his father's house, so Marie-Hélène's grandfather. And who was an older man, well, probably my age, older man, and but who had obviously been in World War II. I've been in the war.
Oh.
Basically, was very nice. We talked, and I noticed that he was wearing what's called a quadrillen. You know what a quadrillen is?
Yeah.
I'll draw you something like.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure your people know your followers know what that is, but that was a symbol of the French resistance during World War II. And actually, de Gaulle is buried within a huge, like 200-foot.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I saw he was wearing this, and I said, I like your. And he said, do you know what that is? He goes, do you know what that is? And I said, yeah. And I said, and he like was surprised that I knew what the maquis was. And he then I told him, actually, I had an uncle, my mother's brother came in on D-Day. I know you're planning on going to Normandy.
Yeah.
And was parachuted into the U.S., into the area in Normandy, and his parachute was caught in a tree when he landed, and he was trying to cut himself out, and down the road was a German car with soldiers in it that were coming right towards him, that were obviously going to kill him. So as that was happening, 6 or 8 people sort of suddenly appeared from an orchard, with maquis, and they had the machine guns, and they basically killed the Germans, and they saved his life basically.
Amazing.
So I kind of said to him, I said, "Where were you? And he said, "I was in Normandy." And so I said, you basically could have saved. You might have been the person that saved my uncle. And I said, "You're here." And he started to cry.
Oh.
And I sort of didn't quite understand a little bit. And so what did I say? And then he came in, he gave me a big hug. And then his father came and gave me a big hug. And then all the women were in the kitchen because we had finished eating, and they all came out and looked at me like Maria said, "Qu'est-ce que tu as fait?" And everybody screaming. And so it was, at the end, it turned out to be her father had a much different feeling about me. So it was kind of a very nice. Wow. It doesn't take much to make one part of a family, I guess.
Yeah.
So after that happened fairly early on. After that, it was just a very different kind of a feeling, I guess, if that makes any sense.
That's wonderful. Wow.
So anyway,
what a coincidence in the end.
Yeah, very much so. So and then we had a long talk. I mean, that's one of the things I know in going through your cliches, or I don't think it was this last one, but it might have one that been before that, about the whole idea of the Vichy, the Pétain Vichy government, the French surrendering. And I think I said in a comment to you, I said, it's, unless you've lived in a country where the war has been in your country, it's impossible to understand. I mean, if you have a force like the Nazi Germans were and invading a country, your primary goal is to yourself and to your family.
Yeah.
And if the best decision sometimes is to say, okay, I'm going to stop. I'm going to do this. I'm going to protect my family, and I'm going to work on the side to try to help my country. But to sort of just go out and fight openly is kind of crazy sometimes. And America has really never had a war on their soil that they can understand. And I remember, I think I asked you in a recent commentary, in your garden video from class, from class, are there still zones rouges in the area? And, when I was there, if you travel up to the Belgian area, there are still zones rouges. And these are areas that you can't go in since World War I. So we're talking about 100 years.
Yeah.
So there's no one in America can understand that.
Yeah.
I mean, So that was an important thing. I forgot your original question now. I talked too much.
No, it's okay. It was like your best memory, but you brought up a lot of really interesting things.
Yeah, and then in Tours, it was so that was in Bayonne. 4 years later in Tours, it was a different vibe already. There was a lot of things. That was sort of I talked about the 30 year to 45 to 75. I mean, everything ended basically. The whole economy of the world was like really rapidly growing. The quality of life in France was increasing dramatically, as it was in the United States and England. But everything sort of came to a halt literally when I was in Tours with the oil embargo in 73, 74.
Yeah.
That's sort of the end of the Trente-Glorieuses. So that really was toward the end. But Tours is a bigger city than Bayonne, as you know. It has a very large university, has a much more diverse population than Bayonne, and a lot of students. And the difference in Tours is I came with a group. We were sponsored by a university in the United States, but once we got there, we just sort of spread out. And I was in a dormitory, and in a student's housing basically, and all of the rooms are private. There are no roommates, no club, and so you're really on your own. So there was no family, there was no friends. So that took a little bit. That would have been very difficult to do first, I think. So it was nice that I had the experience in Bayonne first. In Tours, like I said, I had to sort of go out and try to meet people, which I did. So it worked out well as well.
So then, what about your worst memory, if you have one? I hope you don't, but I don't know.
It sounds kind of stupid, but I really don't have a terrible memory.
That's great.
The worst memory, I guess, and it's really not a bad memory, would be the feeling of like, am I doing the right thing in those first, like in this small amount of time between finishing up my sort of intensive English course, which really wasn't that intensive in Paris, and going to Bayonne. Because like that train, on the train ride, I remember thinking like, God, am I really doing the right thing? Like I said, but it all turned out wonderfully. I really do not have a bad memory. I really don't.
That's amazing. Wow.
I didn't get arrested, so everything was good.
Yeah. So you didn't get arrested, but did you have like a crazy moment? Like, what is your craziest memory, or what's the craziest thing that happened to you there? I mean, here.
God, I guess. Well, certainly in Tours, I was old enough to be able to legally drink. So going out to bars at night, I eventually had a girlfriend in Tours as well, who's I think I told you, boulangère, and so that. Going out with friends and getting drunk and getting a little rowdy.
Yeah.
I guess the craziest thing I had, which has become much crazier now, when I was in Bayonne, and I'm sure you know, Le Fête de Bayonne is like the biggest. I think it's still the biggest festival in France.
I think it is. Yeah.
And it's in August. Back then, it was very, very small. It was not a huge. Now I think it's 5 days now. It was much shorter. There was still a lot of people. I was young, but still drank because I looked older, and there was not a lot of problems doing that. But going to that and was really a lot of fun and kind of crazy. And
wow. Oh yeah.
People's primary goal for going there is to get drunk. So everybody had a good time. It is a huge. If anybody has the opportunity to go to the Fête de Bayonne now, it's if you've never been there, it's a great thing. Oh, it's wonderful. It's great. And one of the interesting things, I think, actually, I'll even say that it might be one of the best things were involved with people. But one of the differences I found in France, and I've lived in a lot of different places in the eastern United States, And, you know, if you live in Philadelphia, you support the football team in Philadelphia. But I don't know that there's a real like bond of people that live in Philadelphia. It's like people, but in France, it's sort of different. Like especially, I noticed it more in Bayonne. In Bayonne, there's really une fierté bayonnaise.
Ah, yeah.
So,
Yeah.
And, you know, in fact, you know, and people like singing, you know, there's like, there's various songs, you know, Les Avants de Bayonne, you know, it's like for the soccer team, like everybody sings it, everybody gets into it, everybody wears red and white now for the Basque, the Bayonne, actually Pamplona in Spain, they copy that. But it's just a very feeling that everybody is together.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something we don't get in the United States, I find, as much. And we're not talking about in a sports team. This is like, I mean, Bayonne has 1 million people in it in the summertime now for La Fête de Bayonne. It's like 1 million people is a lot of people in this small area. It's pretty amazing. So that's a very interesting experience. So
okay, I need to get there one time.
Yeah. Oh, Bayonne is beautiful. Bayonne is beautiful. Biarritz and that whole area is just beautiful. So.
Yeah, a lot of tourists come here now. Like not now, but like in the last years.
I'm sure. Yeah, when I was there, like I said, there were British tourists, some French tourists in the summer, depending on if you were a Ocean, I guess how do you say it? So you would go to Biarritz, but it's I think it's changed a lot. I've not been back, interestingly enough, due to things in my life. I knew I was an odd person to do what I did because I never was interested in teaching French, or I was planning on going to medical school, which I did, and I've not been back to France since 1974. And I hope to do that someday, but I'm sure it's much different now, as you've shown us in your videos. So.
Yeah, but I hope you will actually come back. It will be amazing for you to see.
Maybe not like on April Fool's Day. So.
Yeah. Then I have one last question for you.
Sure.
Well, actually, I have a few ones, but they all are kind of the same. So, how did it change you, like coming here, or how was your life after coming to France?
I think it gives you anything one does for that length of time. I think going to a foreign country for a week, it's enjoyable, but it's probably not going to change you very likely. Spending 2 years, particularly 2 years between 16 and 21, is a very kind of formative part of your life. Yeah. So I think you learn to really understand that in the end, people are much more alike than they are different. Mm-hmm. Everybody sort of wants the same thing. Everybody loves their family, loves their children, loves their grandparents, wants to be happy, wants to be safe. It's all pretty common sense. It's pretty easy. I always thought that if I was a politician, a great thing to do would be to have each country say, well, we're going to take, there's 200 countries in the world. I don't know if there is, but we're going to take 1,000 people and students at 16 and send them for a year, 5 of them to each of these 200 countries, and spend a year, and then you're going to come back and you're going to talk about it and tell us about it. And I think it gives you, it's an appreciation of what things are like. Yeah. There are differences, and the differences are much more, I shouldn't say there were no bad differences. I think the differences were funny sometimes and amusing and different, but actually very, very nice. And so you find yourself doing things when you come back that you learned in France, for example. There are things I still do that people comment on, having lived in France. I still put my little, I still make a 7 with the little line in it, you know,
Yeah.
I just do it. I don't know why. I still eat. I learned to eat, you know, I don't know if Americans eat with their hands the other way. I don't know if you know that. I mean, Americans typically if you're right-handed, you hold the knife in your right hand, you cut your food, then you set the knife down, pick up your fork with your right hand and eat.
What?
Yeah, almost. Yeah, you can almost. So yeah, it's very. So now when I eat with. I am right-handed, so I eat with my knife in my right hand, and use my fork in my left hand. Just like you do the opposite of being left-handed, I think, right? You hold it.
Left-handed, I hold my fork in my left hand.
So, okay, do you? Okay, that's interesting.
And the right-handed people do the opposite.
So you cut with your right hand then?
Yeah.
Okay, no, I do. Most people do the opposite. That's interesting. But Americans almost always put their knife down and eat and switch hands. It's very common. So it's a strange thing, but I don't do that, and people sort of look at me weird sometimes, like,